Hey friends, I thought we'd make a little video going from Adam down to about the time of Joseph. And so what we're going to do is kind of build a picture of what happened in history. Okay, a lot of us don't really understand the things of the past. What I want to do is focus primarily on the flood, Noah, and his descendants. You know, where they went, where do we get these different languages, different religions, etc. So let's briefly jump into to Adam. Okay, and we'll start there. Here's Adam. Okay, Adam came out of the dust of the earth, and he would have been born sometime around 4000 BC, a little bit more, 4300 BC. Okay. What we see from this graph here is that Adam lived to be about 930 years old. You notice that everyone here lived to be about 900 years old, and this is before the flood. So before the flood, everyone lived a long time, had longevity. After the flood, this longevity grew shorter and shorter, okay? And we'll come back to that. Another thing to think about, when you live to be 900 years old, you gain a lot of experience. So think about family members that have 20 years or 40 years experience in construction or in medicine, okay? They're just entering their years of expertise, right? Now imagine entering your 400th year or your 800th year of that profession, okay, that trade. You're going to be very knowledgeable. And so I think that the people, the antediluvian people, were something that we cannot quite grasp. They had to have had a very different way of life, a way of technology. They had different metals that were on top of the earth that were in more abundance that the flood had, put to the bottom of the earth. Okay. Also, when you have, Noah warning them about the flood, of course they would have thought he was a little crazy, because here he's saying that rain is going to fall, that water is going to fall from the sky. This is something that they were not familiar with before this. You see this little picture where she's kind of saying that he's crazy. Well, it's not just because that the world would have a flood, it's because there was going to be water coming from the sky, because the water came out of the earth in the morning, and there was a mist that watered the earth every morning, according to the Bible. And so this was kind of a new concept to them. So just like people today ridicule that the earth will be destroyed by fire after the second coming of Christ, here we have the same thing, people ridiculing that the earth is going to be destroyed by water. Now you see the boat here in the background. We're going to come back to this, but it was a very large ship. The Bible specifies the measurements, the size of the boat. And we'll get to that. I don't want to quite jump ahead. All the animals would have made their way to the boat, 2 by 2. I believe that they would have been small animals or young animals. Young animals they eat less, they poop less, they're easier to manage. And with the size of this boat, and we're gonna get a visual in a little bit, but with the size of this boat, I do believe that we could have the diversity for which we have today. Think about dogs, okay? A few hundred years ago, there was, 1/30 of the dogs that we have today. With all the breeding and whatnot that we've done, you have the Great Dane and you have the Chihuahua. You can have, they all come from the same branch, or from the same trunk, I guess you could say, and there's these different branches. And so there's a lot of phenotypes in our genes that are expressed at different times. So before the flood, it's easy to see that much of the world, all the continents, they fit together, right? Pangea. If we look at a picture of the world today, it's easy to see how this puzzle piece, again, fits together. But what happened? How is it that the earth was covered in water? Okay. The Bible says that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Okay. But it's interesting that the water rose for 5 months. So why this discrepancy? Okay, raining for 40 days and 40 nights, and the water rising for 5 months. Okay, It says, and of course, it says in the Bible that the waters came from the springs of the earth. And so when we look at what's underneath the earth, many of us are familiar with the tectonic plates. So here we see these, tectonic plates, or this ridge, okay? And before the flood, we could imagine that there was water here beneath this shelf, you can say, because the water watered the earth, right? Every morning there was a mist that rose. And so it was a different atmosphere. But now we see that this, heated material, okay, expands and rises and it just circulates underneath these plates, okay? During the flood, when the water was coming out of here for 5 months, imagine this activity, this enormous activity, slowly pushing the continents apart over a period of 5 months or a year. The ark was floating on the water for over a year. So again, when we look at this picture of the earth, you see here that there's this mid-Atlantic ridge, okay, which has a lot of volcanic activity. Here's a diver that's swimming through the ridge. Here's just a little glimpse of some of the volcanic activity that's there below the water. We know that there's a lot of volcanic activity below the water. And so what started off as Pangea, okay, over these 5 months or a year, pushed apart. And what you have is what we have today, okay? But where did the ark land? Okay, the ark landed in modern-day Turkey. In the mountains of Ararat. And so here we see the country Turkey. And here, on this very contentious area of the world, you have Mount Ararat. That's, here you have, of course, Turkey and Iran. This is Armenia. And so you have a lot of different ideologies, religions, etc. And there's a lot of war that goes on in this area. But somewhere on Mount Ararat, the ark landed, which I think that they found. Here's a picture of the ark. This is, if you watch a video on Ron Wyatt, there's really interesting material. And I'm going to come back to this picture in a second, but I want to look at some more pictures on Google. When we type up Ron Wyatt here into Google Images, right? As mentioned before, if you look online, if you look in the Bible, it gives the specific length of the ark. And what is the chance that this structure, that we're going to talk about a little bit more, is the exact size of the ark? Okay. Not only that, but as you can see here, okay, this is a picture of what they did was they grabbed a metal detector and they went along the top and they measured out where all the rivets were. And so there's these chunks of metal that are along this structure, which is quite amazing because they shouldn't have had this technology. According to our understanding of history, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, they should not have had this technology at this time, which would have been about 2300 BC. Not only do you have the rivets on the top, but here you have on the side them measuring out the brackets that held the ship together. Littered throughout the area, you have these rocks, and here you have this this hole that's carved out of the top, and they very well could have been anchors to the ship. I just read an article that was released in November of 2019, so less than a year ago, that was talking about continued studies. Studies were halted in that area, again, because of war. You can watch the video and do more research yourself. But there are 3 decks, just like the Bible says, to this. This is a ship, and I mean, what else can it be? Government confirms this is Noah's Ark. On June 26th, 87, the Turkish government established the new Noah's Ark National Park following confirmation by a government commission of the investigative work on the site by the American Ron Wyatt. Anyway, I very much recommend watching these videos as they're just enjoyable to watch. Mount Ararat is an inactive volcano. You can kind of see that here with the terrain of the land. What happens is it has a lot of these lava, landslides, and you can read on Wikipedia which ones they've had in the past. They've had a lot that have occurred around the time when the Ark would have been on Mount Ararat and centuries after. And so you can see the land here, that this is smooth, and that all of this, rugged, deformed land is what you see in a landslide and when lava goes down in, kind of a gully or between a valley. As mentioned, right, it's the length that the ship would have been. And here you have these, it says rib timbers, or these brackets. And as that picture showed, the rivets of metal that went throughout the top. But going back to our thought, if Noah's Ark landed right here on the mountains of Ararat, okay, if the world was covered in water, there was not ice caps, okay, because before the flood, there were no ice caps. So where did the ice caps come from? So when Noah and his family, he was with his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, so there was 8 of them total. It says that God sent a wind to help the water recede, okay? Now, when you send a congealing wind, congealing means to freeze, right? What would happen? If the water was receding, you can have ice forming at the north and at the south. And what you would have is a mini ice age. So as this picture right here shows, right, if you had the north, the Arctic, with a greater amount of ice, it would have connected what is Eurasia, right, and North America. And so here you have this, the Beringer Strait, which you would have been able to walk over. Here's another, all these pictures that you have, just kind of their imagination on what this would have looked like. So I have a question. If the ice came down to this level, right, what would happen to the water over here in the middle? It would decrease, right? Because if you have more ice and more water up here, then the water that is in this region would be lower, right? And as this ice up here begins to melt, the sea level would rise. And if this here along the equator, if the water was lower, all of this would be land, right? So from Asia to Australia, Oceania, would be a land. It would all be accessible by land, which makes a lot of sense. Here off of the coast of Japan, you could look this up yourself, there are structures that are underwater. So here are, and you can look this up more yourself, just type it into Google. You have these structures that are deep in the ocean, okay? This is not natural. These right angles that you see here, this is not natural. This is a structure that was built shortly after the flood. And as the waters began to rise, it covered. Now there are a lot of fake things on, if you do Google images, so don't believe everything you see, but as you research this one more, it's legit, I guess, legitimate, I guess I could say. Here's an article. It says, ancient underwater structure said to be 14,000 years old, evidence of alien bases and UFOs, question mark. Again, when people don't believe in God, things go into weird directions. I don't think that these were created by UFOs. These were created by the descendants of Noah and his grandchildren as they expanded throughout the earth. Now, if all of the earth is connected, right, and there's this land ridge right here because of the ice, and there's this land ridge here because the water is lowered, then we can imagine better how animals would have migrated the earth. Okay, but what I'm saying is that elephants or larger animals travel very slow. Okay, whereas marsupials, okay, their gestation period is very short. And so if you had, elephants and kangaroos reproducing on the ark, let's say, then when they get off the ark, okay, the elephants are not going to go that far. Whereas marsupials that can carry their youth and that have a very short gestation period can travel a great distance. And that makes sense because the two continents we know of with marsupials are Oceania, more specifically Australia, and down throughout South America that we'll see. And that's easy because a kangaroo, for example, would have been able to travel and settle over here. And then you have other marsupials that would have been able to make this journey and go over this way and down into South America. South America doesn't have any large animals. The largest animals they have are jaguars, which easily could get there. They have llamas, which I don't even know if they're domestic. My point is that there are no large animals here in South America. Because again, it would have taken them too long to travel from the ark to this region. If you think about bison, it's easy for bison. Think about them. They like the plains and tundra. They would have crossed here across Russia, and they would have gone through over the Bering Strait and settled down in the plains of current United States. Okay. Whereas the elephant, the hippo, the rhino, etc., all of these large animals stayed in this region. Okay. So just it's logical, it makes sense. If you have the waters that have been receded, right? If the waters were low, then, here we have, it doesn't show on this map, but off in this region right here, you have Easter Island, okay? If you look at a map, and I've done this before, and you look at the depth of the ocean, okay, there are more little islands and it's more shallow off the coast right here. So if the water was already hundreds of feet more shallow to begin with, there would have been more islands dotted along here. And I imagine that people would have, you could see an island, you take your ship and you go from one island to the next, and you eventually settle on Easter Island, which would have been the largest island of this region back before the water rose. So it would make sense that you would have had a larger population, a larger civilization over there. And as the water rose, of course, the civilization couldn't grow, could not expand, and that's that. So, yeah. Again, all I'm trying to do is just try to build a picture and help people use their imagination on what could have happened after the flood and what led to where we are today. Here's an interesting article I found. This is Göbekli Tepe, okay, in Turkey. And it says here, believed to be the first temple ever assembled by mankind. It's said to, I wouldn't necessarily look at the dates. We could talk about that more later. But here it says predates Stonehenge. Okay, so in whatever way that they measure the dates, you can see that it's older than Stonehenge. Who made this structure? And that's something that we want to look into a little bit more. What I find interesting is that if you have the ark that was located here on the mountains of Ararat, and you have Göbekli Tepe that's down here in the plain, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a topographic map and see that I believe the descendants of Noah traveled here and settled in these plains. So again, looking at the map, you see that this is all mountainous area, and then you come into these plains. Well, if you're, back in those days, they were herdsmen. They lived from the animals that they had. And so you'd have to go to, greener pastures in order to feed your cattle, your different herds, okay? And of course, as you go down this way, you can see that there's a lot of mountain ridge. There's ridges, excuse me. But what you would want to do is you'd want to go downhill. You'd also want to go south because you're going to a warmer climate, and they would obviously know what's north, south, east, west. You know, they were on a ship for a long time, and they're hundreds of years old. They're intelligent. And so they go down south, go into warmer land, and they follow water. Okay, why? Because you need water and your cattle needs water. And as they get over here, they make their way into this plain where they settle. Okay, and there's going to be more evidence of this in a second. But I do believe that these are the descendants of Noah that constructed Göbekli Tepe. Because if we look further at this structure, okay, this is just kind of an idea of what it looked like, and I'll come back to this picture because I want to mention some things. But what's neat is you notice these pillars. What do they have that are etched on the pillars? Okay. Here you have some type of, I don't know, a fox, a boar. You have birds. They have different types of beaks. Here are some more, maybe birds with rounded beaks. This looks like a lamb. Here's an ox. Here's some type of, I don't know what that is. Another, like a raccoon. Here you have what looks like an ostrich. I don't know, those are long legs, a long neck, etc. This looks like a vulture, right? Here are different birds too. You have different types of beaks, different structure. This is a peacock. Here's a scorpion. There's a snake. Here's another, maybe another boar. These are old pictures. If you go online, you'll find some better ones. Here's kind of what the structure looks like. They're continuing to dig out all of this, and they're finding this, you know, that there's a lot of structures around this. An article that I just read, and this just came out 2 weeks ago, and it was really neat, is that from this, there's several of these circular structures that are close to each other. Okay, from the center point of one to the center point of another to the center point of another measures a perfect triangle. And so in this article, you have these archaeologists that are scratching their head because they date this back to 11,000 BC. And they're saying, wow, humans didn't even know what the wheel was at this time. And they didn't yet know how to, they did not yet have the technology of agriculture. And so they're kind of scratching their heads saying, how can these guys have these perfect mathematical planned out, you know, symmetry and not even know what a wheel is? And so kind of silly, but it's because they're assuming that people in the past didn't know what a wheel was. So as already mentioned, right? So if you have the family and they're going down, you know, towards the south, towards more fertile land, following water, going out of the mountains, going into the plain. By the way, right over here is the other oldest structure ever to have been built by man, according to modern day findings, older than Stonehenge. So this area is just riddled with, you know, just a lot of ancient things. And so here, Göbekli Tepe, notice the position of Göbekli Tepe. Now I want you to notice something else that's really neat. Here we have a picture of Noah's descendants, and I'll help you read this a little better. But Noah had 3 sons. As you can see, he had Japheth, Ham, and Shem. And so here with this red region, this is the descendants of Japheth. This yellow region, the descendants of Shem. And in the green region, the descendants of Ham. Okay. What do you notice about Göbekli Tepe? Göbekli Tepe would have been positioned somewhere around here. Okay. What is unique about this region? It's the only region that has all 3 colors. So all of the nations would have split from here, you know, where Ham's descendants would have decided to go down this way. Japheth would have decided to go this way, and Shem settled down this way. So I don't think it's an accident that Göbekli Tepe has been discovered, you know, something that has a whole bunch of animals that are, of course, carved into it. And yeah, the descendants of Noah's children. Now, what does it mean by the descendants of Noah's children? If you go to Genesis chapter 10, we have a list of Noah's descendants. Okay, and here is this is on Jewish Encyclopedia. You can look this up on any encyclopedia, and it gives a list of the descendants. So these are the sons of Japheth, and it lists them here. Here are the sons of Gomer, which was one of the sons of Japheth, listed here, etc. And right over here, you see Mizraim, okay, which is Egypt. Okay, Cush, which is Arabia, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. Elisha, that is islands off of Greece, okay, Asia Minor. You have Chittim, which I believe is Cyprus, but we'll go to that in a little bit. Anyway, these are all descendants that moved into different directions. And so the way that you find that, so the Bible says that Ham's son was Mizraim, okay? And so what we do is you see that, again, here's Ham, okay, the green, and here you have Mizraim, which is, as you can see, on the Nile. So this is Egypt. If I type Mizraim into Google, okay, it says Mizraim is the dual form of Matzor, meaning a mound or fortress, the name of a people descended from Ham. It was a name generally given by the Hebrews to the land of Egypt and its people. Neo-Babylonian texts use the term Mizraim for Egypt. So if you go to Wikipedia, I'm just using an easy example. It's both in the Bible that it says that these are that Mizraim went on to form Egypt, and also outside of the Bible, where it says that Mizraim is who went on to form Egypt. I just took a couple pictures, and here are some other ones that I clicked on. For example, I mentioned Elisha. Okay, and you have here, it says scholars have often identified this Elisha with Cypriots or with Cyprus. Okay, and so this is, again, it's outside of the scriptures. Also here, it mentions not only that, this is something I want people to remember, but if you had the descendants going from this region right here and sailing to Cyprus, okay, it doesn't mean that the people stopped there. And so people would have inhabited the island. Once the island became overpopulated, then you would get in a boat and people would sail. And it says that they went on to form also modern day Lisbon. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is, just because you don't see the name go all the way up to the north or all the way to China, etc. Now this is where the first people had established. And of course, people continue to move once their descendants have established. And so from here, they just went on, began to expand further and further out into the world. And this is true. I mean, we find this would have been, again, sometime around 2300 BC. And if you go into Wikipedia and you just look up ancient China or the Mayans or the Aztecs or the Olmecs, let's just take a look at it. Ancient China. And so what you have here, the earliest known written records of the history of China date from as early as 1250 BC. Again, so if this occurred sometime around 2300 BC, it makes sense that it would take, hundreds of years for them to expand and move their way out and reach China and the Mayans. Let's go to ancient Mayan culture. The Mayans are farther away, so it's going to take longer for them to get there. So if we click on the Mayan civilization, we see here the first Mayan cities developed around 750 BC. Again, we're seeing, this is just a very clear picture. What you have is people settling and moving out farther and farther with time. So looking at this map, some people might say, well, what about the Tower of Babel, right? So we know that the Tower of Babel was, the Bible says, in Shinar. Notice that it's in green, and that's because Nimrod, who was the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham, okay, is who conquered this region and began to build this great city. Okay, and he founded these other cities, as you can see. But people that were rebelling against God would come from all these different, parts of the earth and would help build. And as this structure grew, remember these were intelligent people. They were building structures that we don't even comprehend today. I mean, think about this. Think about the pyramids. We still today say, wow, how was this done? Was it aliens? No, it was people that lived a long time, that were stronger than we are, and more intelligent than we are. Okay, and these are enormous boulders. I mean, these guys did an enormous work. Okay, and not only that, but when you go around the world, you see that this rock structure is all around the world, and that's because it was carried around the world from one central place, mainly the Tower of Babel. Okay, which is quite amazing. And so if you have Nimrod starting to, control this area and starting to build this great tower, it doesn't surprise me. If we go to this right here, this timeline again of longevity, okay, this would have been right here a contemporary of Nimrod, right? Because Shem was the brother of Ham, okay, and this Arphaxad would be the brother of, or the cousin of Cush, and so the next would be Nimrod. And so I'm just trying to say that Nimrod would have lived a long time, just like Cush would have lived a long time, and Ham would have lived a long time. But look at all the people that live after them. The longevity drops drastically. People start to die young. Why? What is this change? We could talk about that, but what I really want to emphasize is if Nimrod is the ruler of these cities and he's in charge of building this Tower of Babel, what does he look like to all these people below him? He looks like a god, essentially. He lives, twice, 3 times as long as they do, or more. Okay, he sees like 7 generations, die in front of him. He would have been stronger, better in stature. And so when you have this type of power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, Nimrod is known for abusing his power. And Cush. And so if you have these dynasties and you have all of these people below you, you would create, I believe, you'd create a lot of myths to control people. And so I do believe a lot of mythology comes from this period of time. I did mention that we were going to look at somewhere outside of the Bible that showed longevity. And here, the Sumerian king list that you can find in Wikipedia. Okay. Again, we have here Cush, right, who was the father of Nimrod, and they went on to found this Babylon, Akkad, Erech, etc. What I find interesting is that when you look at the Sumerian king list, you can go down to the dynasty of Kish, or Cush, right? And you have here the length of reign. And you have all of these kings listed, and what do you see? You see that their ages, that they reign for hundreds of years, and that it gradually goes down in years, okay? So here we have, this is a good example. So here you have the rulers of Uruk, 300-year rule, 400-year rule. This says 1,000 years, which I don't believe. I think that it's the block is so, as you can see, the block is probably so corroded it's hard to read. But you have these, 100 years, 126, 30, 15, 9, 8. And so you have this gradual dwindling down of reign. And you see that here with most of them, right? You have 80 down to 30, 200, and I don't understand why it goes up. But again, this is not all understood, but it's just interesting that a civilization outside of the Bible would have something like this recorded. Okay. And so some of us are familiar with the story of Babel. They were trying to reach a tower, build a tower up to God, up to the heavens, and that that God came and confused the languages, which I think is a very merciful thing to do. So the fact that there's about 70 descendants here, and they go on to create 70 nations, 70 languages, it makes sense, because it doesn't take that long to create, another dialect, etc. Right? So if you start with the 70 languages, 4,000 years ago, and you type in here into Google how many languages are in the world, you can see that it says here that there's about 6,500 languages, which makes sense. I mean, think about Old English, Gaelic, things that were spoken of just 500 years ago that are sometimes incomprehensible to us. And so things change rather quickly. Also, when you have a tribe go off in a certain direction, when you have one family that breeds in this day, they were kissing cousins, right, for a lack of better words. But if you have strong characteristics within one family, as you grow larger and larger, these characteristics are going to become more prominent. Your features are going to be more prominent, and so you're going to be identified by the way you look. Skin color is going to change. White skin, for example, is more of a mutation, or it's not really what we're supposed to have. I believe we're supposed to be, if you read studies, we're supposed to be a little darker. Adam and Eve would have likely been in the middle, color-wise, between white and black. And that's, again, very, very logical. And just as they were trying to defy God in the past, we're just doing the same thing today. And so here the languages are all separated, they're divided. And it's funny that we have here in the EU Parliament building in Brussels, the European Union Parliament building, you have there, obviously this is structured, it's built after the Tower of Babel. And this is one of their posters that has Europe, many tongues, one voice. And so kind of the opposite of what God had done at the Tower of Babel in the past. And so again, it's just interesting that this defiance, that we're even, creating buildings again to be structured after this defiance in the past. When you look at this picture, some people might have seen this, but it's just interesting that you have all of these blockheads right here at the bottom. These two, the bosses, that guy looks like he has a rounded head, which doesn't really matter. But here you have these upside down stars. They want you to think that there are stars going to the side, but they're upside down stars, which is very symbolic. And there's 11 stars. Of course, they want you to think that the 12th star is behind this tower right here. But 11 also has a lot of symbolism in the occult. So just an interesting poster that was made by the European Union. So I think this is a good place to stop. I just want people to understand that, the descendants of Noah, the descendants of Japheth, Shem, and Ham, we could talk about this further. Okay, I'd be happy to talk about it further. But what I just want, the takeaway is to see how different nations were formed, different languages were formed, and maybe we can touch on that in the next video. These are some little pictures that I took from Wikipedia of the descendants, and what I was doing was just highlighting things that were, I thought, interesting. And I'm not going to read this, but I'm going to quickly just go through this, so you can press pause and read it yourself. And like I said, this is a good place to finish. Hopefully you guys gained something from this. I'm just trying to, again, have a better picture of the past, and we can talk about more specifics as we go along. Here's Javan, which was a son of Japheth. And Javan, even in the Sanskrit, right, is here it's Yavanna, right? Or Ionians. You can just read this and see how it's kind of changed. Words are not always the same, or names are not always the same. Think about, in English we say Germans or Germany, but the Germans call their own nation Deutschland. Think about Deutschland and Germany. They're completely different words. But with historical records, they come to understand that they mean the same thing. Or in Spanish, Germany is Alemania. Completely different. Alemania, Deutschland, Germany. Okay, so that's just an easy example. And so when you see these names, if you do word studies, you can see that they mean something else, and they don't always have to be the exact word. Here's the Dodanim people that are even identified by the Egyptians. This is an island in one of the Greek islands. As I said, Shittim, this is Cyprus. Tarshish, there's a lot of speculation on this. A lot of people say it's either Sardinia or Cadiz, which is in modern-day Spain. Ashkenaz, this is Slavic. As you can see, it started up here in Armenia, and it kind of went up into the Slavic region in northern Germany. Some people might be familiar with Ashkenazi Jews. It comes from this. Riphath is also kind of modern-day Russia, went to the north.